Taras, we've heard your thoughts on the Russia-Ukraine war, but now Hungary is giving us more surprises. They've sent a delegation that's supposed to check how the Druzhba oil pipeline is operating. How much does this gas pipeline really matter now for Hungarian politics? Where is Orban's personal ambition in this to grab onto this topic as a key element and an excuse for why Ukraine shouldn't be supported? And where are the actual worries and hopes of the Hungarian people?
Well, it's a love with strings attached, of course, because the Russians have always sold oil out of friendship with significant discounts. And those discounts included many corruption risks that allowed them to fund the party and lower gas prices, for instance, in Hungary, to tell stories about how well the people are living. This, of course, gave a big head start to Orban. And no one wants to lose such a flow, of course, because life was very pleasant. I'm sure that, by the way, it wasn't just Orban who benefited from this oil. I suspect that some of it was also trickling into Austria and some into Germany, because it's surprising that no one is pressuring Orban for breaking his promise to give up Russian oil back in 2022. So in this case, it's further amplified by the election campaign. The lack of oil is, in their view, actually part of an episode of pressure, terrible, unrelenting pressure on Hungary from both Brussels and from scary Ukraine, which of course wants to conquer Ukraine. You can see, I've seen on the internet that half the country is already covered in billboards featuring photos of our President Zelensky. It feels like they're electing Zelensky there too. Yes, he's a participant in the campaign because he's like the face of aggression, as they say. Right? This is Orban's attempt to mobilize his electorate. Well, we'll see if it works. I wouldn't write Orban off. He's a very, very smart politician, regardless of how we feel about him. He knows his voter very well. He has a pretty well-oiled and efficient machine that he has carefully built up over time, which allows him to mobilize and organize a large number of people when needed. So honestly, I would not really hope or expect that he could just lose the elections that easily, just like that, without something significant changing. And by the way, I don't think that even if Magyar wins, Hungary's policy towards Ukraine will change much.
Well, Taras, what do you think of the story that Zelensky even said it's completely unclear in what status the Hungarian delegation arrived? So they're just, it's not an official trip. They just crossed the border, entered Ukrainian territory. So what? Are they going to drive around, take photos, videos, or is this some kind of maybe provocation? Well, when the president says he doesn't know their official status on Ukrainian territory, for what purpose and with what task they arrived. So they won't even, well, it turns out they won't investigate anything. They're not going to find out anything, actually.
What are they going to investigate on the territory of another state?
Well, they came to see what happened to the Druzhba oil pipeline. But when people go to find that out, they probably need to agree on something with the host side.
They can only look somewhere else and at each other there. Yeah, because Druzhba is a restricted facility, access is limited there. Where are you going there, right? You were told no, so it's no. Well, this is clearly done as a provocation so that Ukraine, for example, would lose its nerve and start, for instance, using some kind of forceful measures against this delegation. They might be pushing their way in there now. Lunging at the gods, well, maybe staging some provocations to later show how much they're disliked in Ukraine. And that's why I don't rule it out, because what does it mean? You've arrived, you're conducting some kind of inspection here. Who are you? Why are you coming here at all to order some inspections? Well, this will, of course, be part of the election campaign, especially if the Russians are handling them as such. PR, well, the Russians call it escalating the campaign. So they'll be running around here now, shouting. They might even stage some provocations, as I say. Otherwise, well, they'll probably be fed some borscht. Like if they arrived officially. If it's unofficial, well, then everything's at their own expense. What do we have to do with it? Well, travel away, people. We have a visa-free regime with you. We visit you and you visit us. You have the right to come like that. But otherwise, you have no official status. Well, you're just tourists who came to Ukraine. That's all.
Well, yes, that's also important to mention so that the purpose of this visit is clear, at least at our level of communication. expert to journalist. Taras, I want to ask you about the so-called gift to Putin from Trump. Experts here have read that for the first time in almost 2 years, the price per barrel exceeded $75, and Trump seemingly tried to calm things down a bit, stating that the war in Iran would end within a week because everything would be destroyed and so on and so forth. But we understand that statements are just statements. How things will actually go is unclear, and the Strait of Hormuz is also evidence of that. At the moment, it's unclear with what frequency and how freely tankers can pass through there. Please evaluate this from the perspective of Russia's benefits. Do you see the Kremlin actually gaining something incredible from this war? Or are we embellishing their, let's say, beneficiary gain?
Someone said that Trump gave some kind of gift to Russia. There was no gift at all. The Americans are solving their tasks in the Persian Gulf. They don't need high oil prices either, especially Trump, because he's running for election and he needs fuel prices lower than they were under Biden. Well, there were relaxations in one area regarding sanctions because the Americans failed to meet their obligations to India, first and foremost. They allowed the oil that had already been shipped, which is at sea, to be sold to India. We don't know, by the way, at what price they'll sell because only one party was allowed to buy. And that one party can twist their arms saying, we won't buy at that price. That's what you're trying to show there. Well, especially since they're selling for rupees, buying rather. The recent oil spike is a direct consequence of the ongoing war in the Persian Gulf. Yes, it is a consequence of the attack on Iran. But I think that when President Trump says they'll be bombing for about a month, I really do believe they'll be bombing for a month. But the question here really isn't just about the number of attacks that have taken place. Rather, it's about when exactly the Persian Gulf will finally be cleared. And this part adjacent to Iran, which they threatened to block because nothing has been blocked yet. And now the Americans and Israel are working to ensure that nothing flies there at all. Ballistics are being destroyed, launchers, SHAMED production plants, and many other things. And I think next an oil pipeline is opening now. The Saudi Arabian oil pipeline towards the Red Sea is being loaded to full capacity, up to 7 million tons. It used to be 2 million tons, so they're increasing it threefold. The throughput, and ships are slowly starting to pass through there already. I'm sure American military convoys will appear there because this isn't the first story with the Persian Gulf. The same thing happened, for example, around the 80s when there was a war between Iran and Iraq. There were United States convoys then. Whoever piped up back then simply had their head shot off. And they'll do the same thing here now. So will the Russians manage to earn more money? Well, most likely they will. That's a fact, no doubt. Do the Americans, the G7 and others have the tools to bring down oil prices? They have. They have strategic reserves that they can dump onto the market. Like in 2022, they dumped 180 million tons on the market. So I think they could do that right now. Will the Russians manage to take advantage? And will it be long term? No, they won't. Because realistically, it would have been very good for them. It would have helped them if it had lasted for 3 or 4 months, for example, this war. Or rather, not exactly like that, not a war, but the war will likely continue, but inside Iran, for instance, meaning the free passage of vessels of these tankers through the Persian Gulf. I think they won't manage to profit as they expect for 2 reasons. First, it will likely open up sooner for the flow of oil. That's one. Second, who says they'll get their oil out of their own territory? Has Ukraine stopped attacking Russian territory? What? Has the SBU stopped hitting Novorossiysk? By the way, there was a strike recently. They hit right there in Novorossiysk so that the terminals wouldn't work. Well, oil prices will be high, but you won't be able to export it. So to say that everything will be so sweet and someone got a gift, no one got a gift. This is a direct consequence of the war, as I have already told you, the war that happened in the Persian Gulf, and also because the Americans unfortunately miscalculated. They most likely expected that the Ayatollah regime would collapse very quickly, almost immediately. and they would be able to control everything. Instead, the Americans will also take control of the oil and gas industry as a result of this war. And then smoothly, Iranian oil and gas will go to India instead of China. And then Russia can start practicing right away, learning to sniff its own gas and wash it down with its own oil, because it won't be needed by anyone at all anymore.
I like the ease with which you give this forecast. It's truly inspiring. But nevertheless, Taras, a situation has arisen where Ukraine's cards are visible, which Trump tried to ignore. This year, specifically the mastery of anti-drone tech and cheap means of destroying cheap Iranian drones, among other things. And now our delegation is actively participating in cooperation with allies in the Middle East. The fact that during 11 days of war in Iran, the US and allies fired more missiles, Patriot missiles, than they gave to Ukraine in 4 years. Could that change during this war? Has it dawned on our allies that Ukraine isn't a player with no cards, but one who might hold the most serious cards in the Western military community in general?
Well, of course, there's already an ad on Fox where they show on the channel that there was a funny story. They showed how advanced American technology shoots down Shaheds. Only it turned out that it wasn't advanced. Only Ukrainian technology shoots down Shaheds. There was an interceptor drone there. Well, actually, they corrected it later, said it was a Ukrainian drone after all. Of course, this is a great chance for Ukraine to achieve its goals. And I believe that we need to open up exports, sell to the Middle East, the maximum number of opportunities in order to resolve issues related to getting money, gaining influence, well, and offering this to the Americans. Well, of course, Americans are wealthy people, you know, and they like to fight in a wealthy way, but they also count their money and start looking. Well, they had a radar there of that advanced system, thought, right? A drone hit it and put it out of commission. Well, because it turns out this radar, well, it doesn't see such drones because it's not designed for that. So, of course, this will have an impact. Of course, it will have an impact if the Americans start buying our drones. Consider it, well, a plus 200% markup for the military industrial complex production in our country in general, because it's a sign of quality. This is, of course, a completely different relationship with the USA, a completely different relationship with the Middle East. Moreover, let's not forget the Middle East has very wealthy people. They can help Ukraine financially if the Europeans delay the money. What is it for these Middle Eastern countries to give Ukraine, for example, for 20 years, a loan of, let's say, $20 billion? Well, I think that's not really such a large amount of money for them in exchange for security, considering the risks they face. That is oil too. Some petroleum products can be obtained from them. We can also negotiate with them along the lines of, for example, getting it from oil reserves to send this oil for refining here, for example, so that our prices would also be low in our country. Actually, we do have the opportunity not to raise our prices so much upwards as our cartels are doing now, basically, which are raising the price. We have Ukrainian oil after all, which can be refined after all and not have prices jacked up like Ukernafta does. I heard Deputy Nahorniak say there that it's impossible to do. Well, I heard something else. I heard that Timoshenko spoke, and she said that it turns out we can sell our own produced oil and get cheaper gasoline, and Ukernafta should act in a way that brings prices down rather than participating in speculative attacks on the Ukrainian population. So that is, we need to look at this as a whole. Well, the Middle East has very serious people, and we need to maintain contact with them and join the technological chains of the American military industrial complex. And that will be a big plus for us in many ways. And let's not forget that the Middle East is still a competitor to Russia, and they're also basically not interested in the existence of the Russian oil industry. So our interests happen to align right now.
Taras, in conclusion, I just want to say that I'm simply reading the news here, and I really have to ask you something. Gazprom is whining again, complaining about stabs in the back. It's actually about drone attacks that have been targeting the infrastructure of both Turkstream and Bluestream. There were attacks that happened 11 times over the last few weeks. What are we talking about? Well, a gas transport infrastructure facility was attacked, meaning the Ruskaya compressor station, then the Beregovaya and Kazachia stations, the company reports. And this is in the last 2 weeks. Well, basically, they even say 12 times now. Of course, all attacks were supposedly repelled and so on. But what do you think in general about the attempt to specifically attack the gas and oil infrastructure of the Russians as of now? Does it allow us to see some light at the end of the tunnel that will finally, rid Russia of the desire to continue the war?
Well, it won't rid Russia of it, but to an economic collapse, well, it could definitely lead to that. What is it? Their main exports go through Novorossiysk and the Baltic Sea. And if there's no oil export, there's no Russia at all. And then the question of whether they can fight, the question will be which part of Russia will try to fight. And of course, they will, well, as long as Putin is in power, as long as they're not in collapse, they'll try to fight. Therefore, strikes on oil and gas infrastructure, strikes on oil are the path to Ukraine's victory.